Hello again. In this video I want to walk you guys through live the whole process that I've kind of hit and miss on in the other videos, but I'm just going to walk through the entire thing. I'm going to show you all the tools that I need to lay out and mark the mortise locations, and I'll just walk through it, try to talk my way through it as we go. A couple of important things to know that I didn't mention before is if you can see it in this camera angle, but the seat of the stool is actually tilted forward, and that's because the front leg is about a ½ inch shorter than the back legs. And when you look at the pattern and some of the photos on the blog post, it's important to note that everything from the bottom of the leg to the locations of the mortises are the same on all three legs, even though the front leg's shorter. The purpose of that is to make the seat more ergonomical. It rolls your pelvis forward and gives you better spinal alignment when you're sitting in the stool. And if I've done my calculations right, the two stretchers that'll be between these legs and the back legs and front legs should be at a point where when you're sitting in the stool you can comfortably rest your feet on the stretchers. So the tools I use for all this marking out and laying out, first it's important to note that I've got the orientation of the legs in the seat as they will be when it's fully assembled. In other words, the ray plane is perpendicular to the grain of the seat. And if that doesn't make sense, there's all kinds of information out there on round mortise and tenons and how to orient grain for maximum strength, and you can read up on that somewhere else if you'd like. So what I've already done so far, just so I don't skip over any steps, is I've got the bead detail, which is 8½ inches from the bottom of the leg, the same distance from the tabletop on all three legs. I've already done that, I've shimmed it, and I check it with just the simple shop-made compass. Normally these are used to make circles, but it's also very handy for determining the height of anything from the bench. So what I do when I'm leveling this up is I'll set it to one leg. I'll check it all when it's just sitting on the bench. I'll check it to the lowest one, and then the highest one, and then I'll raise the other two legs accordingly. So I've already done that, and I've already just double checked all that and made sure that it works. So the second step I need to do is to mark the heights for this rung and this rung. So that center rung, which would be the centered on the bead, is going to be the back. So I've got that one. I've already marked that on both legs. So I've got tick marks here that represent the top rung. So I will set my pencil to that tick, and I'm trying to go right in between these other two legs perpendicular, sighting down the compass to make sure that I'm not laying it down. That's a little extreme, but I'm not tilting it one way or another, so I keep a very consistent line all the way around. So all I do is simply take that, mark it. I don't need to go all the way around because I really only need the line to be there between these two legs. So I'll come around, I got that one. I will mark the line for the top rung in the back of the front leg, and that's all I have to do for those two. I only need to mark it at these two locations. Now on this rung, this is the one that's going to be closest to the bench top or the ground. So I've got a tick mark on the back of this leg. I come in, set that to my tick mark, scribe my line. Again, I only really need to scribe it between these two legs. That one's good. Come over here. And scribe that one. And that's all there is to it in terms of marking the heights. Now the angles, I showed this in an early video, but I've got this board here. It's quarter sawn, real stable and straight if you were to look down it. But I put some pencil in 2 locations. And what that does, and I'll show you, is I line this up so it's touching the apex of each leg as it currently sits in the leg. And I will rub this up and down. Oops. Rub that up and down a few times, and it leaves a line that is exactly the center of the leg at an angle that it's sitting from the tabletop on both sides. Go around, I do the same thing for the back. I mark that one. And I'm just using very light pressure. I don't want to move the legs. As they sit right now, being that they're not wedged and they're not restrained by stretchers, it is possible they've got 1/4 inch movement in any direction, so I want to make sure that I don't move them around as I go through this process. And then the last one, I rub that up and down, like so. And that's all that does. So now I've got heights of every stretcher. I've got the angle of the legs from the top of the table in 6 locations. Now what I do, the next step is to take a bevel gauge. And what I will do is I work my way around one direction or another. It doesn't matter. I won't actually note which angle is part of which leg. All I'm going to do is take the measurements, transfer them to a board that has a flat edge, and I will draw. It's hard to see it, but this was the previous stool. There's 6 different angles right there. What I'll do is start at that center point right there, and as I work my way around the leg, I'll keep drawing until I have 6 angles. And then I'll tell you how I come up with what is called, I guess it's the average angle of all of those. And all I do, I try to hold the bevel gauge parallel to the plane between these 2 legs, just for accuracy. And I slide it into place. And this is going to be a little tedious because this does need to be fairly accurate. So I will just sight until, just adjust that bevel gauge till I'm just parallel all the way. And once I've got that, come over. My bevel gauge is not very good, so I have to have a very light touch. Of that little tick mark that I already put on here that represents kind of the center point for all these different angles. And I draw a light line. Now, I'm going to go this way just so you can see it. Again, holding the bevel gauge parallel to the plane between the 2 legs that I'm measuring. So there's my next angle. Again, I want to go to that same baseline point right there. Make sure. Now I'll do the back. Bevel gauge is parallel to the plane between the 2 legs. That's good. It's probably not necessary to be as precise as I'm being, but I'd rather try to reduce the number of errors as much as possible instead of compounding them. Got that one, I go to the next leg. Hold the bevel gauge parallel to the plane. Kind of sight back as perpendicular as I can, and that one is the same angle, which in theory it should be. So that's good. That's a good sign. So I don't need to mark that one. Now, I'll work this side. And mark it. White line. And the last one. So that was the 6th and final measurement. And I'm going to try to show you what this looks like. It actually is fairly tight. I'm going to get behind the camera and try to focus on this. Maybe. Alright, so there it is. That was the first stool right there. Stool A, as I call it. And again, I got an 11.4 average. Stool B here. And there's my 6 lines. Now what I'm going to do is at the top here, there's a distance of about 1/4 inch. I'm going to find the center point of that and use a protractor, setting the center of the protractor at the bottom pivot point and looking at wherever, you know, that center is. And then I just transfer that line over, and then off camera I went ahead and transferred that over and measured that with my protractor, and I'm at 11.4 degree average for stool B, which is a good sign. That tells me that the angles of the holes that I drilled in the seat for both stools are pretty accurate. So I'm happy with that. It'll also allow me to drill all 6 legs or all 12 mortises using the same angle on the drill press, which will help me a little bit moving forward. So at this point, we've got the height of each mortise. We have the angle average noted. I've already taken the liberty off camera to stretch my rubber bands because that's kind of a tedious process, but it's as simple as it looks. I stretch the rubber bands across. I make sure that, as you've seen on a previous video, that when I'm sighting across these 3 stretchers, that everything's in plane. And I showed you that in a previous first-person view of this. Now what I'm going to do is locate the stretcher center points. And I'll do that here on camera. I simply hold my ruler underneath the rubber bands, centered. For example, on this one, most of these are very close to 2 inches in diameter, so I just hold this out. One end of the rubber band's on 7 inches, the other end is at 9, so I will mark 8 right there. And then I'll do this side. Trying not to move the rubber bands around too much and hold it stable. I'm marking these center points right on those horizontal lines that are parallel to the bench top that I marked with the compass. And that's giving me height location and center line location. So there's that one. Bingo. And then I'll get the rest of them real quick as I can. There's that one. There really are no tricks to this. It's very simple once I've got those lines drawn and I've got the rubber bands on. It's just a matter of steady hands and marking this as accurately as I can. my next leg. So there's the center line of stretcher number 2. So I've got center line of stretcher 2 on both legs 1 and 2. Got the center line of stretcher number 1 on both legs 3 and 1. Make sure I got all these. Got that center, got that center. And then what I like to do, just because there are a few markings on here, once I know I've got them, I'll just put a small circle around those marks so that if there are any other random pencil marks on these legs, I'm not getting confused later. And after doing a few of these stools, I'm able to just look at these marks and tell which leg it is by the orientation of the wood and the lines that I've circled. Okay, as I mentioned, the final step in the process of height, location, center line, angle, the last piece of the pie is distance. So what are my stretcher lengths? And to do that, as I mentioned, I need to take the rubber bands off because they put quite a bit of pressure on the legs and pull the legs in more than I like it to be. So I simply take these off, set those aside. And reset my shims. By lifting it up by the seat and gently setting it down on my shims, I've got pretty darn close to where the legs want to be naturally. And I'll adjust these shims so they don't move around too much. Okay, now I've got next set of tools here are just 2 rulers. This is the bar from my Starrett 12-inch combination square, and this is just an Incra stainless steel rule. Both are exactly 12 inches long. There's no extra material on the ends that I need to worry about offsetting. So in order to measure it, I'll align one edge of each tool, kind of slide them where it's more narrow than I need it. And very carefully, without moving the legs around, I'll slide these apart until they just touch those marks that I made. And I'm really trying to hit just this edge where I've got the 2 rulers aligned. This can be a little bit tedious, but once you've slidden those apart and you're touching, you just drop them out of place and pinch those 2 together. So I know on my anchor rule it's 12 inches and I've got a projection of 7/16 sticking out beyond this ruler. So it's 12 and 7/16 from surface to surface for stretcher number 1. And obviously I want to mark these as I go. So I've got 12 and 7/16, and then I want to add 2 1/4, which again, I'll have 1 1/8 deep mortise on each leg. So I'll add 2 1/4 inches, that'll give me the overall stretcher length. And I continue the same process for stretcher number 3 and stretcher number 2. So number 3 here on the front left is at the bottom. Should be the longest one, simply because the legs are farther apart at this point. So I just kiss the line. Make sure my rulers are parallel. Pinch it. On this one I've got 12 inches plus 13/16. So we've got 12 and 13/16 for stretcher number 3. Again, I'll manually add 2 1/4 inches and double check that. Now I'll get number 2, which is the back rung centered on the bead detail. This one should be very close to the dimension of stretcher number 1, if I have done this properly. So I'm touching the apex of the mark, and I'll raise this one up till it touches. Spread them apart, pinch it, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 16ths. So 12 and 5 16ths is the measurement, surface to surface, and that's how I use the 2 rulers. So kind of to recap, level legs, make sure your legs are at the proper orientation, which I covered in a previous video. Find your heights of each stretcher by using the compass and marking a line that's parallel to the tabletop. Using my graphite jig, I scratch the surface, get all my angles, average them, and I've got that piece of information. Then I'll put my rubber bands on, find my center points for each stretcher, take the rubber bands off, measure the surface to surface dimension with the legs in as natural state as they can be, which I've done. I'll do that math off camera, and then I can start. I've got the stretchers in the light bulb kiln drying for about a week now, so they should be absolutely bone dry. And I'll go ahead and cut those to length, turn them on the lathe, and the next video you'll see will be me either drilling, I'm not sure, like I said, if I can capture that very well with this camera, or possibly the final assembly. So, thanks again for watching. Bye.